So you should all have an email from me with your group members and their email addresses. So please check that today. So this will be the plan. I will be finishing chapter 4 today, working into chapter 5. When we come back from spring break, the group assignments, I will want them due on the Tuesday, and then the Thursday we'll have the test on chapters 4 and 5. That'll get us aligned with the universe, and we'll be ready to finish the remaining. Yes. We come back on, let's see, spring break is the 10th through the 14th. So we should be back on the 18th. People check me. That's next week is spring break, right?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure. Okay. So we'll finish chapter 4. We will work through chapter 5. March 18th, that will be the vertical integration and electric vehicles position paper. And then that says March 18th, but it'll be March 20th. That'll be chapter 4 and 5 test. Okay. Okay. All right. So we're on pace now. So let's get chapter 4 all wrapped up in a nice bow, and then we'll move on to chapter 5. All right. So we finished talking about the payment options in order to pay for the buy versus make decision. Remember, in the buy versus make decision, the whole point is whether or not we should make our own units or have someone else make those units for us, whatever we're selling. And so the buy option means naturally, what do we use for the coin in order to purchase those items? And these are the ways in which we will buy into the market. The last part of this discussion is why, or how do we make our choices? What is the number one reason that we decide, or if there is a number one reason, what are the multiple reasons why we decide to make instead of buy? So there's really only one reason. There's only one single reason, and there's multiple smaller ones, but there's really only one reason. And I want you to take this, and I want you to think of this for every reason that we make a point of doing something in business. Why do we do it? To increase our return on investment, ROI. The decision to integrate or the decision to buy solely comes from its maximum effect on our return on investment. You start originally, as I said before, in the perspective to not vertically integrate. You must build the evidence, the argument. And what is the argument centering around? You have a greater return on your investment than you did if you had bought. It is the primary criteria. And so, which is more efficient is how we make the choice. And efficiency involves these 3 items. The first is revenue, total sales, period, before tax. What is the generated revenue? And usually what we're talking is in annual revenues. So if you ever see these folks, generally in accounting or anything like that, the assumption is we're talking about what the yearly or the annual revenues are. So that's the first thing, revenue. The next is direct cost. Direct costs are all those costs that are associated exactly as it sounds in the direct production and making of one given unit. Now, since they say costs, we're not going to cost it per unit. We're going to talk about total cost. Generally, if you ever look on fixed cost versus variable costs on any accounting cycle, generally fixed cost usually is a total dollar amount, okay? A variable cost is usually a per unit amount, but we're not going to worry about that, okay? So revenue minus direct costs, in other words, total sales versus the costs that are directly associated with those sales, gives us what's known as net effectiveness. But it isn't efficiency, because the last thing that we have to take into account is overhead. Overhead is all cost indirect, which we would have to pay regardless of whether we were going to produce a single unit or not. Legal fees, the cost of the building. Now, any electricity that is not directly associated with the production of a given unit. Usually, if you're in accounting, you'll find this under the magic column called general and administrative expenses. And this is what overhead is. If this number is small, it's good. It means that we've kept all the costs that are associated with that. It can also be the amortization of fixed assets. That's also important to realize as well. If you buy your fixed assets, like your robots and everything else that makes the factory, if you bought the land, all of those things count. But ultimately, divide that by the overhead, and you ultimately have what's called efficiency. This is an easy solution. It's easy to cut through the confusion. You just look at the raw numbers. If I can buy something, and in buying that, my return on investment is higher than if I make it myself, then I buy. And the rule of thumb is gradually, or in its most, virulent form, it's always cheaper. But just remember these three things: revenues, direct cost, overhead. And I extend the return on investment as to be the reason that any business decision should be made in any organization. It's really kind of simple if you think about it, okay? I mean, if my future value or my net present value is $1 more than the net present value of not doing anything, then you do it. It's as simple as that. And so that's where it comes from ultimately. How do you make the choice? Now, once again, there are enormous advantages for outsourcing distribution, and let's go through them right now. These are enormous advantages. First, motivation for the organizations that provide you with your logistics. There are positive motivations to take care of your work. There are incentives for good performance, and they continue to do well. The positive, of course, is more profit, and the negative is the fear of losing. I've been quite impressed with DoorDash. I mean, I've started doing it, and I'm like, why in the world am I driving anywhere? I could save the money on gas, and it almost equals itself out. And then I generously tip because I can't help it, because I used to do that same thing. And so I get into the red again. Anyway, there's good motivations for your suppliers to perform everything in a good way. The next is specialization. This also connects directly with whether or not you should downstream distribute if you're an upstream provider. You just don't simply know what goes on in order to perform that particular skill. Organizations that are 3PL providers, specialized intermediaries in finance. It is all that they do and there's no distractions. And it also means that there's no distractions for you as well. Survival of the economic fittest. Failure results if they fail to perform better than the competition. God bless our competition. It always makes us stronger. I was reading some pretty interesting things about how retail has changed or is changing in a significant way. Belk is about to open multiple new stores and outlets as well, which I find to be very interesting. IKEA, for the first time in 20 years, is going to start building more IKEAs in the United States. And you would think, is retail necessarily dead? And the answer is no, not necessarily so. Because there are some advantages to still investing, of course, in a modern way. But all of these reasons why they're doing it is because the potential is a higher return on investment. Belk wants to survive. And so they're created these unique outlets. Walmart has bought a mall in Pennsylvania. Now, why would Walmart buy a mall? But they feel that that is one of the ways to take advantage of their synergistic function. The next is economies of scale by pooling all of the demands from several manufacturers. The downstream providers can specialize on their particular needs. Anybody knows the name Briggs and Stratton? Lawnmowers. They make lawnmower engines, small single-cylinder engines, and they're the best in the United States. Every day, Briggs and Stratton in Pennsylvania receives 2 tons of liquid molten metal to replace their own forging that they used to do themselves. Why? Because another organization can do that better than they can. And so they don't have to be in that business. The next is heavier coverage. And so remember the mom and pop store thing with the wholesaler that specializes in mom and pop stores. The wholesaler can call on this more frequently. They understand what's going on in their lives. They can anticipate seasonal changes and provide a better coverage for those downstream providers than they could do by themselves. And then finally, the independence from any single manufacturer. You don't put all your eggs in one basket. It helps the distributors to have more than one partner. This is one of the dangers that a lot of corporations got when they got in bed with Walmart, unfortunately. You know, when Walmart became 3/4 of everything that they ever made, they were in the worst kind of shape that you can possibly imagine. Yes, Walmart is buying everything, but unfortunately, Walmart has their own demands. One of my professors at Louisiana Tech, he had a friend that made trolling motors in Arkansas, really good ones. And Walmart came in and bought their annual production for 4 years. But in the second year, they said, oh, and we want you to reduce the cost per unit by $10. And how do you do that? Well, the only way that they could do it was they took the steel pins out of the trolling motors and they put plastic pins in. And they took off the metal propellers and they made them into plastic. And so this is the difficulty when you only have one partner. And so the independence allows you to diversify your risk. So strong reasons to outsource distribution. Now, there are two types of distribution capabilities that help us make choices as to whether or not we are going to vertically integrate or not. And these are physical, tangible capabilities, and we'll talk about these one at a time. And then we'll talk about intangible capabilities. And these are the things that are not necessarily seen, but provide significant competitive advantages when they're used appropriately. So let's move on and let's talk about tangible capabilities. Well, let's first start with intangible. So I had a friend of mine who was a piano tuner. And so he could listen by ear and tune a piano without a device. That is a really specialized skill. He had perfect pitch. And that is literally what he did for a living. But could he use that somewhere else in any other particular field? And the answer is no. And that is what's known as an idiosyncratic knowledge. Idiosyncratic knowledge has zero salvage value. It cannot be readily deployed to one other principle, and yet that unique idiosyncratic knowledge is vital to whatever it's being used at that point. So my friend's pitch. Now, granted, there are many physical devices that can help you tune a piano. But he had that knowledge right up here that simply can't be deployed in anything else. My friend who's the tailor in the very same way. He understands about cut and fit and body types, and granted, eventually, with enough information, you could make some of the same choices he did, but it doesn't supersede intuition, which is still something that's vital and very human. So that's the first, idiosyncratic knowledge. The second is relationships. How strong of a connection do you have with the distribution personnel? It helps you to cut through the chafe, go directly to the issue, and allow you to, if you have a close relationship, to do things such as just-in-time manufacturing, where your supplier will hold the goods that you have purchased until you need them. How strong and firm is that connection? Many times, it's the difference. If you go with a new supplier, there's a certain amount of negotiation and natural conflict that happens when you're creating new relationships. However, if your existing relationships can do everything that you need, there's very little reason why you should change. And the last is brand equity. And so there are many private labels that are used in the United States. Aldi is one of those great examples. It is a store literally of private brands. 85% of what goes on in an Aldi is their own particular brand. I had an Aldi Merlot, and I lived through it. $4 bottle of wine. It was interesting. But because they carried their own brands, they in essence maintain a strategic advantage over others because they maintain high quality. H&M is very much the same way. H&M has their own particular brands, and they focus on being able to provide quality merchandise at a very reasonable price. And so brand equity, I just may simply not wish to change. These are the intangible capabilities that help us to make choices. Tangible ones, customized facilities. So Federal Express and Amazon 2 years ago got in a spat. Amazon requested, I don't know if you call it demanded, but they required, let's put it that way, 2/3 of all of the facilities in Cincinnati so that they could be able to do their particular job. And Federal Express said, what, are you crazy? Giving over 2/3 of that? I'm not sure I could do that. That's what dedicated capacity is. It serves a particular manufacturer. Walmart and Procter & Gamble have something in this in common as well. They create specialized facilities for each other. When we talk about relationships, we'll talk about them in particular. Procter & Gamble has an office in Bentonville, Arkansas, inside the Walmart. And by the very same token, in Dayton, I think it is, where Procter & Gamble's headquarters is, there's a Walmart facility in there as well. Customized facility are specialized transaction-specific assets that have strategic advantages. And so an example of this is cold storage. And I talked about reefers. Reefers, especially transportation cold facilities, fundamentally changed how we ship vegetables and other goods across the United States. It meant at time when that was not necessarily the killer that it was at one point. But that is a very customized physical facility that is in much demand, especially when we're talking about goods that can be spoiled. And then finally, here's one that I stumble over. Site specificity, that all one time. And this is where a manufacturer may need marketing functions at a particular location. And it may be less suited to the needs of other manufacturers. And this is the Procter & Gamble that sits inside the Walmart. And this is the Walmart that sits inside the Procter & Gamble as a very unique location. So much so that it excludes itself from all other dealers. And so, customized facility, dedicated capacity, and at a particular site, unique location. That is a strategic advantage. One of the other things about a dedicated capacity is it avoids the difficulty of overcapacity because you have already got your requirements set down. And then finally, one of the last things that comes about when we're trying to decide whether or not to vertically integrate is what kind of environment in terms of the business environment at that time is conducive to a vertically integrated market. So, what does low specificity and high specificity mean? Low specificity means that the products tend to be generic, require limited dedicated capacities and areas. They don't require customized facilities such as cold storage. That's what that means. So a highly volatile market, one in which there's enormous ups and downs, where there's changes that are going on fundamentally in the way business is being done. When your goods do not require specialized services, then you outsource your distribution to maintain flexibility. In uncertain times, you do not pigeonhole yourself into locations that could cause harm to your company. Now, in a highly volatile market, if your product needs specialized facilities, if the market is still promising, you vertically integrate to gain control. You gain control of the employees, the goods, how they're sold, and you avoid some of the small bargaining circumstances. You, in essence, have greater control in that particular market, so that if there are competitive advantages that you can take care of, you take care of it. And so this is where IBM found itself in 2007, 2008, when computers or PCs started becoming ubiquitous. You started to see the iPads eating into the tablets, eating into the PC market. And then you also saw the growth of the smartphone as well, which was gradually taking away, in essence, the control that a personal computer would bring. This is where Microsoft, if they were smart, would have come out with their Surface Pro 10 years earlier, which they had, but they decided they did not want to mess with the market for Microsoft Windows to their detriment. So instead of owning 95% of all the desktop operating systems, not just desktop operating, but all computer operating systems, now they own a third, because the rest is taken over by Android and by iOS. And so high specificity, high promising market, you gain control, you vertically integrate, and you take control over those things that you can. And this is when IBM got totally out of the PC market and started renting their machines, and in essence, leasing their software. By the way, IBM for 20 years was the #1 software manufacturer in the United States. And nobody talks about IBM as a software manufacturer. They're still #3. And that's in the days, or in the modern day, of Android and all the rest. IBM is still there. Why? Because they control major industries as well. IBM owns the banking industry in the United States. Just about all of their systems, their AS400s, all the way up to their mainframe systems, all the banking systems are running IBMs. They control that market. And that's a very vertically integrated market. It's a one-price market. The banking industry doesn't care. When it comes to money, they'll take care of the maintenance contracts. You just take care of everything else. I'll buy the drinks, you buy the Cadillacs, okay? So what are the other reasons to vertically integrate? How do I know how well my goods are doing? If I'm a manufacturer and my sales are reasonable, but it's not like it really took off like I wanted, how do I know whether I'm doing well or not? This is the concept known as performance ambiguity. I don't know how well I'm doing. I'm not sure whether I'm doing great or doing awful. Performance ambiguity in a traditional distribution system is difficult, because once I sell my goods to a wholesaler, I don't know what happens to them. I mean, I have a good idea. That's what you do research for. But if I could do better, maybe my particular goods require some certain fine tuning. If I vertically integrate, I start talking directly to the consumers and finding out just how well I am doing. And connected with reducing performance ambiguity is learning from my customers whether or not I'm providing them the value that I wish. Or my customers may be getting value from my stuff that I never knew. So here's a interesting example of being able to use a particular item. So this is a real person. His name is Boudreaux. He was actually my brother's pharmacist in Covington. So way back in the 80s, all right, we suddenly realized that zinc does a great job when it comes to diaper rashes, all right? But there was no commercial product to do that in the 80s when I was raising my son. And so pharmacists were actually creating their own little mix-ups, their own little stuff. And in Covington, Louisiana, there was this guy by the name of Boudreaux, and he was creating this as well. And somebody came by and said, this is such a great idea, we need to commercially do it. And of course, Boudreaux, being the brilliant marketer that he was, called it Boudreaux's butt paste. Okay. God. Anyway, this particular item started selling like wild, and they had no idea why until they found out that in the LSU locker room where the football players were, is that it was being passed around because there were more than little kids that were having problem with rashes. Okay. And I'll just leave it there. Okay. And you can go laugh at one of them 300-pound linemen all you want. All right. That's not my job. But this is an example of they took off, but they never knew why. And then they suddenly found out. And so performance ambiguity, that's one of the reasons why. And you learn from your customers about what are their particular advantages that you have. Sometimes your customers take your products in ways that you never would have thought. So, Luxottica purchased LensCrafters to be able to understand the market in the United States of selling glasses in a professional manner, because Luxottica in France only sold directly to eye doctors. It was a miserable sale because you had certain social clashes that happened between organizations that are not, in the same group. There's a delicious discussion about Daimler Chrysler when Mercedes-Benz bought Chrysler, and talk about a culture clash. Chrysler survived and actually was much better off because of it, but it ultimately they got taken over anyway. So the other reasons why vertical integration. So retailers, who has the most success? This is not going to be like a question, but there are a lot of downstream providers like Walmart that have tried to focus upward. And not everybody does it to a success. And so this is Intermarché, and they're a grocer. But the problem with them, quite simply, is they lost their way. And this is the difficulty when you try to integrate into a distribution channel of which you're not a member. Many times you can get caught, and they got caught as well. So this is one of the dangers of forward or backward integration, is quite simply is you're getting yourself into businesses that you may not have confidence in, and to their detriment. And so the ending of chapter 4 is integrating forward or backward is difficult, and there are key questions that you have to answer. Remember, you start from the buy position, and you buy the distribution channels you need, because an outside specialist understands their particular skill set better than you do. And just remember, vertical integration, the only reason, well, there are many signposts, but the major reason why you vertically integrate is to increase your return on investment, ROI, okay? All right, so that finishes chapter 4. So chapter 4 was about the make or buy decision, whether to vertically integrate or to not. The next chapter, chapter 5, to increase your return. It's the only reason to really do anything, to be truthful. But if you're honestly wanting to know why, okay, you start from the buy position. But if integrating forward or backward increases your return on your investment, by all means do it. Now, as to a lesser extent, to gain control is another big reason, especially if your particular product requires a certain amount of customization by yourself. But you're still doing that to increase your return on investment anyway. So you can always say that the bigger reason why is that. If you come across one of the questions and it says, what's the best reason? That's the best reason, okay? If it says also to gain control over your assets, that's a good reason too, but it's not the best reason. So that's how you take it, okay? Good question. All right. So, chapter 4 is about make or buy. Start from the buy. Chapter 5 is about 3 more decisions that you make when you're designing your channel. And so the 3 things that chapter 5 is going to talk about is intensity, type, in other words, what kind of channels, and then the concept of dual distribution. And dual distribution is the determination whether you will use existing channels and whether you will sell in a vertical market environment at the same time. Okay. So that's what dual distribution means. So we'll talk about channel intensity, channel type, and then dual distribution. And then we'll talk about how do we go about closing those gaps we talked about in chapter 3. And so channel intensity. Channel intensity is how much coverage the supplier should have in its various forms. As a manufacturer, how much coverage maximizes my return on investment? And a lot of it is also around the product category that your goods are. Channel types is how many different ways you will go to market and find ways to combine them together. Will we have stores? Will we have kiosks? Will we have websites? Will we have all of them together, and how do we manage them all? And the third is, should the supplier simultaneously go to market through its own channels and through third parties at the same time? Classic example of here in North Carolina is Broyhill. So Broyhill has many partners. When you go down the mountain towards Hickory, there's a lot of those nice little mom and pop places. I've bought some furniture from them, really nice people. They buy from Broyhill. They have a good connection to Broyhill, but Broyhill has their own factory store as well. Interesting thing, way back in the 80s when I was in my 20s, North Carolina was the place to go when it came to get furniture. I had friends of mine in Mississippi who, who shopped through catalogs in Broyhill, bought their goods on mail order, and they would ship, trucks, Broyhill trucks would bring their goods to Mississippi and across the United States. One of those mom and pop stores, as a matter of fact, that's a Broyhill distributor, still sends 2 or 3 trucks to Florida every year. They still have customer bases that do that. And so it can live reasonably within a given environment, but there's a major hangup. And of course, that'll be a 10-point question that you'll have eventually. So let's talk about channel intensity. So first off, let's look at a couple of things, and I want you to think of the mindset. So we have our 3 major players. We have our manufacturers. We have our intermediaries, general and specialized. And then finally, we have our end users, because end users perform certain channel functions. Now, right off the bat, I want you to understand that the manufacturers and the end users both have the same mindset when it comes to distribution. Manufacturers and end users want to be able to find the product in as many possible places as they can. The manufacturer wants to sell goods. That's how they make money. The end users want to buy goods. And so as many outlets as they can, that's what they want. Intermediaries, however, wish to be the sole source for all the goods sold, which means they want to control any given industrial area that they possibly can, and they want to be able to make all the profit. So the ideal place for the manufacturer, if they can get away with it, is they want intensive distribution. Intensive distribution and saturation are 2 different ideas. Intensive distribution means that a brand can be purchased in as many possible outlets in a given trading area, as many places as you can. This is also within reason. Intensive distribution means that the item is acceptable in as many places as it is generally accepted. That's kind of a hodgepodge kind of statement. But what it means is that the distribution places kind of fit together. Saturation means any possible place, location, you name it, it's available anywhere. Saturation does not help the intermediaries because the intermediaries are fighting to be able to control the sale of that good in a given trade area, and it's impossible. On the other side is exclusive distribution. And this is where it can only be purchased through one vendor in a given trade area. And this is, in essence, a local monopoly. Generally, exclusivity also and intensity also has to be connected to the product category as well, and we'll talk about those in a minute. Now, here's the thing. The more intensely a manufacturer distributes, the less the manufacturer can influence the channel members how to perform the functions. If I am scattering my goods to as many different outlets as I possibly can, I lose control of those items and where they're sold. Doesn't matter. Just sell them. And if control of that item, especially when it comes to proper use, is important, then ultimately that affects the performance and the value that consumers have in it. I'm going back to chainsaws, okay? You don't know which end to point. It's not a very good idea to buy a chainsaw from the local grocery store. You know, specialized tools require specialized knowledge and specialized training. And if I want to be able to make the best impression, I'm going to want to be able to control that. This is the other reason why IBM took away their software from value-added resellers and started doing it themselves, because they found that they could maximize both the product that they're selling and the consumer's overall satisfaction. If I need control, once again, to increase my return on investment by creating greater value for the product, then I don't want to intensively distribute. And so intensive distribution requires a certain amount of thought. Now, as I said, manufacturers want to have as many possible outlets as they can, but the downstream partners, the middle partners, want to be able to determine exclusivity. Because if I'm not exclusive, I don't have control over prices. And so price competition comes in two ways. Intra-brand competition means that that same brand is sold by more than one store in a given trade area. And so if I were to go into Foot Sloggers and I were to go look for skis or whatever there, or if I'm going there to look for winter gear, that winter gear can probably be purchased from many other locations in Boone. Not a lot more, but a few more. And this is intra-brand competition. This is competition that takes place among the sellers of the same brand. Inter-brand competition is when price competition takes place among different brands in the same product category. And this is the exclusivity that intermediaries wish, especially when the goods are shopping goods. Shopping goods need to be shopped. You do not have just one brand many times in department stores, such as Belk, because consumers wish to shop. They want to be able to see different styles, different cuts. And that does also include the realm of electronics as well. Ideally, what you want to be is you want to be a distributor of a wide number of those items within a given product category, so that no matter what you have, your consumer ultimately buys from you, regardless of whether it's the least expensive or the most. That's nirvana. Intra-brand competition? No, because how are they going to choose? If it's the same brand, there's only one way to choose. If it's the same item in different stores, how do you choose? Same item. Cheaper. Yes, exactly. There's always only one way. It's price. Very good. Okay. So downstream members love inter-brand competition, and they hate intra-brand competition. So let me also talk about when the big bully comes along. And that's when a brand is so strong and so powerful, they can basically put their prices and their goods in any location they wish. So Coke really doesn't have any promotional considerations. Why? Coke is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. You can buy it any place you wish. The only choices that you might consider are which flavor you would like and whether or not you want the sizes that are particularly good. Coke can be so stupid. Coke was going to do away with Coke Zero because it was eating into Diet Coke. And Coke Zero became number 2 in the Coke lexicon, I think like 3 months after it was sold. And somebody went, oh my God, this is hurting our prices on diet. Who cares? Okay. They came up with a hit product and their natural thing is they're going to punish them. Anyway, I'm going on. They basically don't care. What is the choice that any particular distributor has? Well, you can't stop selling it. You can do whatever you can, but you've really only got a few things that you can do. One of them is that you can just discontinue selling the product, or you can stop selling the entire product category, or what you can do is try to have converts over to a lesser price. Now, Aldi, to their credit, Aldi stocks their own brands close enough, but not too close, so that there is nothing other than Coke, but consumers of Aldi consume Aldi goods, not necessarily just Coke. So they can be able to get over the issue. And so not everything works out in a perfect manner, especially when it comes to strength, especially when it comes to power. You either find a way of living with it or you don't. Well, here's a couple of the difficulties that happens when you have intra-brand competition in a given trade area. So I used to work for Con Appliances. There used to be a Con Appliances in Gastonia. I worked for the one in Lafayette. This was 40 years ago. Wow. Anyway, so Con Appliances, what they used to do is on the Saturday, which is a big traditional selling day retail, the group would get together and we would talk about what are the specialties for that particular day. So usually what they would do is they would kind of cut this bait and switch a little bit by having a reasonable number of those items, say 10 or 12 in stock. So let's just say it's a television, and the television is actually priced below cost. What would happen is that before noon that day, we would sell all out of that particular item. So in a downstream member, you advertise one brand, you get the consumers to visit the site. When that item is not available, you persuade them, since they're there, to buy another brand in which the seller earns a higher profit. Not entirely bait and switch because they do have the item in stock, but not in sufficient numbers that consumers are going to be satisfied completely. It is misleading. It's certainly ethically wrong, but you see it happen quite often. Okay, so that's bait and switch. So one of my difficulties as a salesperson is I used to love to hear myself talk. I just love to hear my own voice and how much I knew, especially in computer systems. So people would come visit the computer store that I was working at the time, and I would explain all of the differences between certain machines and how well they do. When I was working at Cons, I had the same mistake. And just as soon as I educated my consumers, they would say goodbye, and they'd go somewhere else and buy it for a lower price. In my big mouth, okay? So I spent hours teaching about a particular item, and then consumers would go somewhere else to get it at a lower price. My fault, okay? So this is what free riding is, okay? Free riding is intra-competition where a consumer will go to one place to gain knowledge, and once they have sufficient knowledge to make a choice, they go to find where the cheapest is. I bear the cost, the other store bears the benefit. So in Lafayette, in Louisiana, when I was selling at Cons, we sold Mitsubishi televisions. They had the purest picture that you could find in the 80s. And they also had diamond vision, which for live events was just unbelievably good at that time. The Lambert brightness was just unbelievable. So usually you'd be showing a live sporting event when you would be trying to sell it. Well, right outside of Lafayette at the city limits was a place called New Generation. And New Generation had a contract with Mitsubishi of Canada. So what it meant is that they could sell Mitsubishi televisions for 10% less than we could. So me and the other guy, Tim Schooler, we'd sit there and talk about the machines, and then we'd try to, rig the door so nobody could get out so they could buy from us. Never happened that way. But this is an example of free riding, and these are the difficult factors that happen when there's high intra-store competition. These are the things that happen. Okay. Rule of thumb, can't find a way around it, but that's the way the world works. So I think I'm going to hold right there, and we're going to come back on Thursday, talk a little bit more, and then we'll be getting ready for spring break. All right, folks, y'all have a good day.